Imagine this. A bridge that previously served as an emblem of harmony and collaboration between two adjacent territories is currently lined with concrete anti-tank barriers wrapped in barbed wire and monitored continuously by equipped frontier sentries. Explosive devices are being positioned in the earth underneath it. Sea mines are being procured to endanger the naval force on the opposite side. And the ordinary inhabitants of a tiny Lithuanian community so near to Russia that they can detect Russian frontier guards broadcasting tunes from beyond the barrier. Those inhabitants are constructing subterranean shelters filled with contingency food reserves beneath their personal residences. This is not a sequence from a Cold War movie. This is occurring at this moment in 2025 along the frontier between Lithuania and the Russian exclave of Kaliningrad. And the ramifications of what is developing here could pull the whole NATO coalition into the most perilous standoff Europe has witnessed since the Second World War. Welcome to Bradley Madden. If you are unfamiliar here, this channel works to analyze the disputes and geopolitical emergencies transforming our globe clearly, comprehensively, and without the clutter. If you consider this type of thorough examination worthwhile, subscribe immediately and press the notification bell so you always catch a video. Because this particular narrative about a small section of Russian land squeezed between Poland and Lithuania may prove to be the most significant tension point of this era. And we are going to examine every aspect of it. Let's begin with the fundamentals, because most individuals have never learned of Kaliningrad, and that is precisely the issue. When you don't comprehend what it represents, you cannot truly grasp what is in jeopardy. Kaliningrad is a Russian exclave. That indicates it is a portion of Russia that is not attached to Russia. Examine a map. There is the primary mass of Russia extending across Eurasia. And then 200 miles to the west, positioned between Poland to the south and Lithuania to the north, is this compact detached territory resting right on the Baltic Sea. It encompasses roughly 5,830 square miles, approximately 15,000 square kilometers. It has a populace of slightly over 1 million residents. It is a fifth of the dimensions of Lithuania, and it is arguably the most weaponized section of territory in all of Europe. Before it was Kaliningrad, it was Königsberg, translating in German to the King's Mountain. Its background extends back to 1255 when the Teutonic Knights, a German crusading order, originally founded a community there. The title celebrated King Ottokar II of Bohemia, who had backed their expeditions. The city's location on the Baltic Sea rendered it a natural commercial center, and in 1454 it became part of Prussia as a tributary state of Poland. The Protestant Reformation moved through the territory, and in 1525 the Duke of Prussia secularized his domains. Over the subsequent 2 centuries, Königsberg was contested by Poland and Sweden. But in 1701, Prussia reclaimed authority and designated it the seat of the Prussian monarchy. In 1871, all those smaller German territories were incorporated into the German Empire. And from there, Königsberg thrived as a cultural and financial hub, the birthplace and permanent residence of the renowned philosopher Immanuel Kant. But everything shifted in the 20th century. During the First World Conflict, Königsberg became a strategic stronghold. After the conflict, it became a base for the ascending Nazi movement. And during the Second World War, the Allied forces bombarded it continuously because it symbolized the military core of Germany in that region. Then in January of 1945, the Soviet Red Army initiated what it termed the East Prussian Campaign against more than 130,000 German soldiers. It was a hopeless final resistance. By April of 1945, after months of savage combat, now recognized as the Battle of Königsberg, the Soviet Union ultimately overpowered the German defenders and captured the city. With triumph came a renaming. Königsberg became Kaliningrad, titled in tribute to Mikhail Kalinin, a Soviet official. From the destruction of the former Prussian seat, the Soviets constructed a naval installation and manufacturing center. Kaliningrad became the command center of the Soviet Baltic flotilla. Here's where it becomes compelling from a geopolitical perspective. When the Soviet Union disintegrated in 1991, the other Baltic nations, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania claimed their liberty and proclaimed sovereignty. But Kaliningrad did not. It continued as part of the Russian Federation even as it found itself geographically separated from Russia by recently sovereign nations. Through the 1990s, the territory experienced economic downturn and demographic decline. But from the 2000s forward, Kaliningrad recovered. It became a designated economic district, drawing international capital. It developed a reputation as a visitor attraction, featuring exhibitions honoring its German heritage and the tradition of Kant. It acquired itself a moniker, the Baltic Hong Kong. 82% of Kaliningrad's inhabitants possess documents for international travel, a benefit almost unheard of in continental Russia. The territory had its own traditions, its own character, and for a period even its own ambitions. Between 2009 and 2010, there were widespread anti-government demonstrations in Kaliningrad against Moscow's authority. The Kremlin had to dispatch a special representative just to pacify the discontent. And that substantial military deployment you observe in Kaliningrad today, part of its function has consistently been to manage the regional populace, not merely to extend influence externally. But before we proceed deeper into what Kaliningrad has evolved into and why Lithuania is currently investing hundreds of millions of dollars to strengthen every highway, bridge, and frontier checkpoint that borders it, we want to encourage you to subscribe to Bradley Madden if you haven't yet. We address these evolving disputes in real time, and this circumstance is advancing rapidly. Press subscribe, press the bell. You will not want to overlook what follows next. Now, why does Putin require Kaliningrad so critically that he has converted it into the most intensely armed territory on the globe? Begin with geography. Kaliningrad provides Russia entry to the Baltic Sea. And not merely any entry, but year-round unfrozen entry. That is strategically invaluable. The Baltic Sea adjoins 9 nations: Denmark, Estonia, Finland, Germany, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Russia, and Sweden. It is one of the most active maritime commercial passages on Earth. For Russia, controlling a segment of that waterway is vital to its capacity to extend naval strength into western seas without having to traverse the icebound remote harbors of the Russian north. Kaliningrad is based to the Russian Baltic Flotilla, more than 1,000 armed service members, over 100 pieces of advanced military hardware, artillery practices, missile drills, and progressively reinforced advanced staging area pointed squarely at NATO's eastern boundary. And then there is the atomic dimension. Kaliningrad is based to Russia's 152nd Guards Missile Regiment in Chernyakovsk, which is outfitted with Iskander-M ballistic missile platforms. These are not conventional missiles. The 9M723 Iskander-M has a reach of up to 500 kilometers. That distance launched from Kaliningrad places Vilnius within range. It places Riga within range. Approximately a third of Estonia, all of Poland including Warsaw, sections of Germany, sections of Denmark, the complete Baltic shoreline. As documented by Defense Express in September of 2025, open-source researchers from the collective Cyber Barashno tracked and pinpointed at least 2 Iskander launchers traveling along the E28 roadway near the settlement of Kudrysiwo in Kaliningrad, just 35 kilometers from the Polish frontier, during the combined Russian-Belarusian Zapad 2025 military maneuvers. Those launchers were reportedly aimed westward toward Poland. Moscow maintained the maneuvers were protective in character. NATO specialists characterized it exactly what it was: a deliberate act of psychological intimidation, a practice run for swift escalation. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk expressed it frankly during a February 2025 session with German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, declaring that Warsaw and Berlin are within distance of Russian Iskanders, that there are 100 atomic warheads in Kaliningrad, perhaps more, and that they have lately been upgraded. That is the head of a NATO partner openly acknowledging what Russia has positioned on Europe's threshold, and disclosed Russian manufacturing and budgetary records, as documented by United 24 Media in December 2025, indicated that Moscow is now mass manufacturing a new Iskander 1000 model, an extended-distance ballistic missile with a reach of up to 1,000 kilometers. Russia declared in January 2025 that it would commence producing and stationing these missiles in Kaliningrad. If that deployment advances, nearly all of Central and Northern Europe falls within its attack distance. But the missile danger is only one aspect of what renders Kaliningrad so hazardous. There is a second element perhaps even more concerning, and it has a designation: the Suwalki Gap. The Suwalki Gap is a slender band of territory roughly 62 to 70 kilometers broad, depending on the reference, that extends along the Lithuanian-Polish frontier. It lies between Kaliningrad to the west and Belarus to the east. This passage is the sole overland path linking Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia to the remainder of NATO and the European Union. Without it, the Baltic nations are geographically separated from their partners. Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, the previous commander of United States Army Europe, has declared plainly that Russia could seize the Baltic nations quicker than NATO would be capable to protect them. Security specialists and Western authorities have labeled the Suwalki Gap NATO's vulnerable point and the most perilous location on Earth. If Russia were to capture that passage, connecting Kaliningrad with Belarus in one rapid military action, the Baltic nations would be isolated. NATO support forces could not reach them by land. The coalition's Article 5 mutual defense commitment would encounter its most serious challenge since the Cold War. This is the strategic landscape that Lithuania finds itself navigating. And Lithuania is not remaining passive. The connection between Lithuania and Kaliningrad was not perpetually hostile. In reality, before February of 2022, there was authentic cohabitation. Darius, a Lithuanian resident who previously resided in Panemian, a modest community just across the crossing from Kaliningrad-Sovetsk, recounted to Al Jazeera how he actually had Russian companions as a youngster. Families grilled. They moved to melodies floating across from Russian watchtower positions. The Queen Louise Bridge linking Panemian to Sovetsk was a representation of that delicate ordinariness. That bridge is currently a secured position. The initial visible fracture arrived in June of 2022 when Lithuania implemented European Union restrictions by preventing the passage of specific prohibited merchandise through its land to Kaliningrad. The EU had been developing its restrictions framework since Russia's takeover of Crimea in 2014. Lithuania's foreign affairs minister was categorical in reaction to Moscow's outrage, declaring openly that it was not Lithuania executing anything. It was European restrictions that commenced operation from the 17th of June, implemented under guidance from the European Commission and under its protocols. Russia was furious. A near associate of Putin traveled to Kaliningrad and announced that the restriction had been provoked by the West in breach of international law. Moscow called the EU representative to the Russian Foreign Affairs Department. And then arrived the digital assault. The Russian hacking collective Killnet, which has thoroughly recorded connections to the Kremlin, accepted accountability for a substantial distributed denial of service offensive against Lithuania. Killnet announced it had dismantled over 1,752 digital resources across Lithuania's transport, power, and banking industries, and that it would only cease the operation if Lithuania ceased the restrictions. Lithuania did not cease the restrictions. But that digital barrage was merely a preview. What followed next was considerably more consequential. February 24, 2022, Russia's comprehensive assault on Ukraine. In a moment, the theoretical assessments of Baltic protection became tangible and pressing. Lithuania's defense chief Laurynas Kasčiūnas proclaimed directly that what is occurring in Ukraine is an urgent signal, that Putin's hostility is evidence there are only a handful of years remaining to ready, and that NATO needs to mobilize. As documented by military.com in December 2025, Lithuania has currently elevated its security expenditure to between 5 and 6% of GDP, rendering it the first NATO participant to achieve the ambitious target championed by U.S. President Donald Trump. That is not a modest figure. That is an economy reorganizing itself around endurance. Here's what those funds are being directed toward. And this is where the magnitude of what Lithuania is constructing becomes genuinely remarkable. Lithuania's security ministry, collaborating with its military forces, has initiated a thorough program of counter-mobility defenses along the Kaliningrad frontier. The Queen Louise Bridge, which previously accommodated cross-border movement, has now been equipped with 80 dragon's teeth and 7 hedgehogs additionally enclosed in concertina wire. Dragon's teeth are enormous triangular concrete structures arranged in formations to halt armored vehicles immediately, a method employed on the Eastern Theater in the Second World War and now utilized with remarkable efficiency in Ukraine. Hedgehogs are the X-shaped metal barriers you have observed in wartime images, designed to obstruct vehicles and foot soldiers equally. The defense program extends well beyond a solitary bridge. As documented by the Lithuanian Defense Ministry and verified by Army Recognition in August 2025, Lithuania has officially initiated a 3-echelon frontier protection framework, a stratified defensive structure extending up to 50 kilometers inland from the boundary line. It is one of the most ambitious defense undertakings completed by a European country since the Cold War. The first echelon, situated up to 5 kilometers from the frontier, will serve as a reinforced exclusion zone, anti-armor trenches, pre-constructed concrete tetrahedrons, barbed wire networks, pre-positioned minefields, advanced infantry stations constructed to NATO specifications equipped with Javelin and Spike LR2 anti-armor platforms, artillery backing from 120mm mortars synchronized through integrated combat coordination systems. The second and third echelons extend further inland, establishing layers of resistance that an invading force would have to penetrate one at a time, all while NATO reinforcements assemble. The objective is not necessarily to block a Russian assault at the frontier alone. The objective is to exhaust it, delay it, and contain it long enough for the coalition to respond. Defense Chief Kassianos has designated roughly $648 million for this initiative across the coming decade. On top of that, $864 million has been allocated to the military forces more extensively, and $2.6 million has already been designated for immediate acquisition of counter-mobility engineering supplies. He characterized the dedication in unmistakable language. Not only will they establish foundations for the fortifications, but they will reinforce particular locations permanently and promptly. He provided the illustration of a crossing that is presently not in operation, but which an adversary could potentially employ to traverse, stating that it also will be reinforced. Anti-armor ground mines are already en route to Lithuania. Some are horizontal activation mines. Others are bottom activation mines engineered particularly to demolish vehicle undercarriages. Maritime mines are also being obtained to endanger the Russian Baltic flotilla's capacity to maneuver openly in the shoreline waters Lithuania borders. And there is a secondary dimension to the defense narrative that virtually nobody is discussing. As documented by Newsweek in January 2026, Lithuania has discreetly been equipping more than 20 bridges, highways, and flyovers across the nation to accommodate demolition devices. The Lithuanian military forces confirmed the activity, but clarified that explosive materials are not being installed during peacetime. The structures have merely been pre-equipped so that in the circumstance of conflict, those crossings can be collapsed at a moment's warning, preventing advancing Russian troops the utilization of Lithuania's own transportation network. Lithuania is additionally intending to build 27 counter-mobility installations along the frontier, fortified stations housing numerous categories of barriers. The objective is to activate one every individual week. Some will be situated near the boundary as the primary line of resistance. Others will be stationed further behind as part of the stratified echelon framework. Defense Chief Kassianos has additionally emphasized the function of Second World War period Soviet shelters constructed along what was termed the Molotov Line, a defense network that previously extended from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea. There are roughly 300 of these shelters on Lithuanian soil. Some rest precisely in the Suwalki Gap passage. Lithuania is restoring them as combat stations and civilian refuges. Even ordinary Lithuanian residents are not waiting for their administration to act for them. In Vistitis, a tiny community in southwestern Lithuania, so near to Kaliningrad that inhabitants can observe Russian frontier sentries from their windows, Individuals are almost composedly getting ready. A manufacturing employee named Arina Kushus told Al Jazeera that inhabitants occasionally bathe in a pond just 10 meters from the Russian barbed wire barrier. They can detect Russian frontier sentries on the opposite side broadcasting tunes. When that occurs, she explained, they have a cookout and sway to the melodies emanating from the watchtower. That feeling of ordinariness cohabiting with looming peril is something only Lithuanians who have existed under Russian control can genuinely comprehend. But underneath that composed exterior, there are subterranean shelters being erected by ordinary inhabitants, contingency food reserves being accumulated, and a significant increase in voluntary armed forces enrollment. The Lithuanian Riflemen's Union, the nation's citizen militia, has experienced a jump in enrollment requests so remarkable that there is reportedly a 2.5-year queue list to enlist. Thousands additional requests are arriving in every year. This is a country assembling not in alarm, but in systematic, clear-headed resolve. And then there are the Germans. In April of this year, approximately 24 German troops arrived in Lithuania. The forward contingent establishing the foundation for something considerably bigger. By the conclusion of 2027, Germany intends to have 5,000 permanently based soldiers in Lithuania, creating what will be designated as Germany's Lithuanian Brigade. German Security Minister Boris Pistorius has been forthright about the implications, declaring that the world is entirely transformed from what it was before February of 2022, and that both Germany and Lithuania understand that sovereign defense alone is not adequate. Partnerships will have to be employed to counter Russia. The historical significance of German soldiers permanently based in Lithuania is not overlooked by anyone. Nazi Germany controlled Lithuania from June 1941 through January 1945 in an operation that eliminated approximately 90% of the nation's 250,000-member Jewish community, one of the greatest Holocaust casualty percentages in Europe. That Germany is currently voluntarily deploying soldiers to Lithuania as a safeguard against a mutual Russian danger is a notable transformation in the European defense framework. But to genuinely appreciate what is fueling Lithuania's resolve, you need to appreciate Lithuania's background with Russia. Because this is not theoretical geopolitical reasoning for the Lithuanian population, it is inherited collective memory. Before there was a contemporary Lithuanian country, there was a modest tribal community residing in the area around Vilnius, concerned about dangers emerging from the east. To endure, Lithuania and Poland established the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth in 1569, a governmental alliance that for 2 centuries effectively restrained Russian authority at bay. But the Commonwealth deteriorated through the 17th century. Conflicts were conceded, and in the late 18th century, the Commonwealth was divided and consumed by Prussia, Austria, and Russia. Lithuania came under Russian governance. What ensued was not mere political subjugation. It was cultural eradication. Russia implemented a systematic campaign of Russification, deliberately striving to eliminate the Lithuanian language and heritage in preference of Russian character. In the mid-19th century, thousands of Lithuanians were executed, persecuted, and transported to Siberia in livestock wagons. The Lithuanian media was prohibited. Lithuanian publications were transported covertly from adjacent countries at tremendous individual peril. Then arrived the Nazis. Then the Soviets once more. When the USSR reoccupied Lithuania after the Second World War, the severity was enormous. Soviet troops were commanded to crush the Lithuanian opposition by whatever methods available. The opposition persisted into the 1950s, one of the most enduring guerrilla movements against Soviet governance in European chronicles. Energy began gathering towards sovereignty in 1988 when a coalition called the Sąjūdis, comprised of 500 scholars and Progressive Communist Party members, initiated a public movement for self-determination. On March 11, 1990, Lithuania became the first Soviet-governed nation to reclaim its sovereignty. The Soviet Union did not merely allow it go. 3 stages of arms suppression ensued. Soviet forces commandeered structures. The USSR halted petroleum and gas deliveries to Lithuania for 10 weeks, but Lithuania persevered. The Soviet Union ultimately acknowledged defeat. And then barely over a year afterward, the Soviet Union itself disintegrated. This is the background that resides in Lithuanian spirit. And it is why when Lithuania observes what Putin enacted on Ukraine in February of 2022, it does not perceive a remote struggle. It perceives a reflection. It perceives what arrives afterward. Tomas Janeliūnas, a governmental scholar at Vytautas Magnus University in Lithuania, has characterized the circumstance with notable exactness, observing that what transpired in Ukraine has effectively provided Lithuania time to ready, a harsh opportunity that must not be squandered. Now, let's discuss the wider Baltic landscape because Lithuania is not operating independently. At the start of 2024, the security chiefs of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania convened in Riga and officially declared the Baltic Defense Line, a synchronized joint defense network planned to extend along the frontiers of all three nations with Russia and Belarus. As documented by the Baltic Defense Line Wikipedia listing revised in January 2026, Latvia finished building a 280-kilometer barrier along its border with Russia by the conclusion of 2025. Estonia is erecting 600 shelters along its 294-kilometer frontier with Russia. Estonia and Latvia have additionally executed a combined air patrol arrangement synchronizing NATO aerial protection missions from Latvian military airfields. According to LSM, Latvia's governmental public media outlet, reporting in December 2025, the Baltic Defense Line is a multi-layered network that encompasses detection, recognition, neutralization, and prevention capabilities, as well as strike capabilities designed to enable NATO troops to mobilize swiftly if Russian units gather near the frontier. Lithuanian armed forces strategists have characterized the landscape as an advantage. They get to determine where any engagement occurs. That is the variety of protective assurance that results from having readied a combat zone beforehand. As documented by Stars and Stripes in March 2026, referencing the most recent yearly security evaluation from Lithuania's intelligence agency, Russia is currently broadening its armed capabilities near NATO frontiers. New maritime infantry formations and supplementary resources are being established in Kaliningrad. The assessment indicated that Russia is enlarging brigades along NATO's eastern boundaries into complete divisions and assembling entirely fresh military formations. A new missile regiment equipped with Iskander-M systems has been created in Russia's western military region, and an enhanced radar has been placed in Kaliningrad capable of surveying airspace thousands of miles into the horizon. In December 2025, Lithuania revealed intentions to construct a new significant military exercise complex near Kazla Ruda, a location selected expressly for its nearness to the Suwalki Gap. These are not excessive responses. They are logical preparations by people who have invested centuries discovering precisely what occurs when you are not prepared. We will naturally keep you informed on every progression in this region. The Baltic Defense Line is still being erected. Germany's complete brigade stationing has not yet been finalized. The Iskander 1000 stationing schedule in Kaliningrad is still being tracked by NATO intelligence, and the wider Ukraine struggle, which precipitated all of this, remains unfinished. Every one of those elements will count for what happens subsequently. If you have remained with us this far, gratitude. That dedication to comprehending the globe profoundly is precisely what this community represents. Forward this video to someone who ought to comprehend what is transpiring in Europe's most perilous passage. And confirm you are subscribed to Bradley Madden so you are present for the following installment, because this narrative is far from concluded.